we're going to not only give you a surprise, an opportunity for you to come to our women's conference coming up at the end of the program. So stay all the way through so that you can find out how you can maybe win some tickets to our amazing women's conference this year. But we're also talking about something that is so needed. It's a conversation that needs to be open up. So today we're talking about grief, but we're going beyond that into an area that so much of the church is not addressing. And that is suicide and mental health and how much we all need to be aware and to help one another through these situations. So, of course, I'm thrilled to have my friends with me as always. And our special guest, Kayla Stoecklein, is with us. And Kayla is one of those people who I just think has such a deep inner peace, I think maybe is the way to say it. I think Kayla's been through a lot, obviously, and we'll tell you all about that. But she's also an amazing woman because you're raising 3 boys on your own. But you make sure that you're not only sharing this message that is so important, but you're giving their boys their best life. I mean, I see you on Instagram and everywhere and your adventures and you're out there, you're skateboarding, you're on the beach, you're everywhere, you're everywhere. So Kayla is an author and a speaker, but she's also here with us today because of an experience that I think will connect to many of us and different things that we've been through. So Kayla, thank you. It's so good to have you here with us.
So honored to be here. Thanks for the invite.
Happy that you're here.
Yes. Kayla, let's just kind of start at the beginning. You're telling a story today that you've told many times, but it's one that I know you never wanted to have to tell. You're being an advocate for something that you did not ask for, that you didn't want to have to talk about. But let's just start with a young couple, newly married, and the joy and enthusiasm that you had for life in the church and where it went from there.
Yeah. So I met Andrew Stoecklein at college. I was a sophomore. He was a junior. He lived in the beach house, infamous beach house on campus. There's all these guys, disgusting beach house, like sand embedded into the carpet. The carpet was always wet. They had blown up a toilet. Like, it was gross.
Of course they had blown up a toilet. What else would you do? Right. Yes.
But all the girls had crushes on these beach house boys. And so one day, one of my friends was dating one of the beach house boys, and she was over there, and they were asking her about her group of friends. So she pulled out a picture of her group of friends and showed it to them. And Andrew pointed at me and said, "I want to meet her." Aww. And so I was so scared. So I grabbed a friend, went to the beach house and met him, and the rest was history. I mean, we fell in love really fast. And at Christian college, it's like a ring by spring kind of thing, you know? Yes. And so I had the ring by spring. We were engaged a year later, married a year after that, super young, 21, 22 years old, and we stepped right into ministry. His parents started a church when he was only 3 years old and had grown the church to about 4,000 people, large staff, thriving, amazing church. And I knew when I chose to marry Andrew that I was signing up for ministry. I didn't know what I was signing up for because I hadn't grown up in ministry, so there was a lot to learn. But I was excited to learn it. I was excited to do it with him. I found my own little niches and passions, and it was amazing.
3 boys. So along this path, you had 3 children as well.
Yes.
What were you thinking? 3 boys. Where do I find the time?
Yeah, it was a whirlwind. About a year after we got married, my father-in-law, my husband's dad, was diagnosed with leukemia. And so we knew that we wanted them to know their papa. We wanted them to know, we wanted our kids to know their grandpa. And so we started having kids right away. And boy after boy after boy. We were blessed with boy after boy after boy. And the third one was a surprise, a wonderful surprise. And it is so fun. I mean, it is full on. My house is loud, wild, stinky, super fun. We live outside. They're eating me out of a home.
Kayla was telling me about the bathroom at their house right now with all the three boys, and it sounds very similar to maybe the beach house.
The beach
boys.
house. That's what I think.
Very.
It's giving very
similar.
beach house vibes.
It is. It totally is. There's sand everywhere too. It's kind of musty. Yeah, totally. It's so fun. I love being a boy mom. It's so much fun.
Well, there came a point that your husband started dealing with panic attacks. Is that where much of this began for him?
Yeah, so his father actually ended up passing away in 2015 from complications from his leukemia journey. It was a 4-year leukemia journey. And during that last year, we had a really special service. His dad was in a wheelchair at the time, so his dad was wheeled onto the stage. He had a baton that was engraved with Andrew's name and the date, and he literally handed the baton to Andrew.
That's a lot of pressure.
It was powerful. Yeah, it was so powerful. So he became the lead pastor at 27 years old. And we have these 2 precious little boys and one on the way. And then his dad passed away just a few months later. And so here he is.
And just that, honestly,
it's a lot.
we just walked through leukemia and lost a family member as well. And having that experience on its own, there's so much grief, so much stress that comes along with that.
There is, and his dad was his hero. He looked up to him and admired him. He was his mentor. Like, he went to him for everything. They were very close. And so it was a great, great loss. And Andrew's heart was for the church. And so he wanted to lead the church through their pain from losing their pastor. And so he kind of put his own grief and his own pain to the wayside. He took 2 weeks off and went right back and preached a series on heaven. And it was about a year after that I feel like it all kind of caught up with him, and he started experiencing the panic attacks. And they really came out of nowhere. It was the fall of 2017, and he had been leading the church, for a couple of years, and we had 3 boys by then. So in itself, it's a very busy season of life. And then you add in, the responsibility of leading this large church and grieving the loss of your father. And so he started having these panic attacks. They were super scary. They would mostly come on at night when he was trying to fall asleep. 3 to 4 times a week, he would be curled up in a ball on the floor. He would be weeping. He would be pacing. He'd be doing everything he knew to do to get it to go away. And I felt so helpless trying to support him and love him through that. There wasn't much I could do to help. And so those persisted and those lasted for a while. And we were seeing doctors and specialists and trying to get to the bottom of it. Like, what is going on? Is this like a thyroid thing? He had a thyroid thing in the past. Like, we didn't think it was going to be a mental health thing. We thought we just needed to get him on like some thyroid medication and he was going to be just fine. But unfortunately, the panic attacks just kept getting worse and worse and worse. And Andrew was still trying to show up and preach through all of that. He had the model of his dad who was preaching from the hospital when he was working with leukemia. And so he just was amazing. It was like he was invincible, and then it all kind of caught up with him, and he had a massive panic attack that landed him in the hospital. And it was then that we decided, enough is enough. This guy, like, we can't live like this anymore. He can't do this anymore. There were Sundays where he was on stage speaking, and I was in the green room crying because he had just gone through a panic attack. And it was scary. It was exhausting. And we were all like, okay, we need to pump the brakes and give this guy a break and try to figure out, we need to get to the bottom of this and figure out why this is happening. What's causing it? The doctors can't figure it out. And so we put him on a sabbatical in April of 2018. And just 2 weeks later, we were sitting in a psychiatrist's office, and he was diagnosed with depression. And I'll never forget that moment. I'll never forget that day. The psychiatrist turned and looked at me and said, "Your husband has depression." And I didn't say a word. I was shocked. It's like I should have seen it coming, but I didn't. And we walked out to the car, and I turned and looked at him, and I said, "How did we end up here?" And Andrew and the doctors were so hopeful that he was on the low end of the spectrum with rest and time off work and medication, that he would just bounce right back and he'd be back to work and back to himself in no time. And so we were resting in that. We were trusting the doctors and trusting their plan. And he was seeing the psychiatrist. He was taking medication, seeing a therapist together for 2 hours every single week. He had taken time off work. The church wasn't pressuring him to return. It was like, take as much time as you need. So we really were trying everything to try to get him better. And it was a really hard summer. You know, we have these 3 young kids, and I'm kind of torn between being caretaker for my husband and caretaker for my children and trying to support him and love him. And he was wrestling through it. He was working through it. And by the end of that summer, the doctors actually thought that going back to work would be the next right step for him. Thought too much time away from work might make his depression worse. And so he returned to work in August 2018, and we knew, and I knew, that he wasn't fully better.
Yeah.
You don't heal from depression that
Right.
quickly.
Right.
And he thought that he was at about 65%, told our family, told our staff he was at about 65% and was hoping to ease back into ministry over time. But if you know anything about
Good luck with
ministry,
that.
you don't really ease back into ministry. It's really
Yeah.
full throttle
Yeah.
all the way. And so it was. I mean, he came back, he wanted to talk about depression. He wanted to talk about suicide. He gave 2 powerful weekend messages on that. He talked about his own struggle with depression. He gave out the suicide hotline number. Like, out of anyone, he would have known where to go for help. And then headed into that 3rd weekend, he had his message written for Sunday. He was excited. We were talking through it. We had a big team rally that Friday night with all the volunteers. He was excited about that. And he went into the office Thursday and had a really bad day. You know, it was clear that his mental state probably wasn't even at 65%. He was still very sick, and something had happened that day, and it just like flipped a switch in him. And it was enough for me and our family and for him and for our staff to be like, whoa, this guy's still like not okay. Maybe he went back to work too quick. Maybe he still needs time to heal. And so as we were away, the following morning, we were away from him for just like 20 minutes, just a little bit of time. And we were making the phone calls, trying to get a guest speaker for Sunday, talking to doctors, talking to other pastors, trying to come up with the next step plan. Like, okay, we already tried all this stuff. What else can we do? Yeah. So as we were away from him for just a little bit, he attempted suicide. And even saying that out loud right now, I mean, it's almost been 4 years, and it's still like just as shocking. And I still can't believe that happened. You know, I oftentimes describe Andrew's suicide like a child drowning in a swimming pool at a birthday party. It's like he was surrounded by people that loved him.
Yeah.
And if any of us knew he was drowning, we would have jumped in the water and
Right.
saved him. We just had no idea. So he was rushed to the hospital, and they were able to get his heart to beat again. And so God gave us the gift of one last day to hold him and hug him and to say goodbye. And so on August 25th, 2018, he took his last breath, and I took my first in this life that I never saw coming as a single mom of 3 very young boys. They were 2, 4, and 5 years old, and as a widow at 29 years old.
Wow.
When you listen to this story, I remember, I've told this story before, but I remember sitting on the stairs, looking down at someone that I loved very much, who was gone, who had also died by suicide, and just sat there in disbelief, thinking, how can we be in this situation? You know, how could this have happened? So whenever I hear of someone else who's gone through this, I like that to ask the question, what happened to you on that day? Because so much of it is understandably about that person who we've lost. But it changed your life forever as well. What happened to you on that day?
Every beautiful dream that I had for my life came crashing down.
Yeah.
Everything that I imagined my life would be, what I imagined my future would be, what I imagined our life would look like, was gone.
Yeah.
It wasn't just him. It was everything.
Yeah.
So it really felt like a shattering of my whole entire life. This life that I had worked hard for, had fought hard for, this life that I loved. I mean, on paper, I had everything I could have ever asked for and more. I had the handsome, successful husband. I had the mom car, the big Suburban. I had the beautiful home. We had just moved into a home in May of that year, and I really, truly had everything I could have ever asked for. And so it really felt like, whoa. You know, I truly never, ever imagined, as I was walking out of the hospital that day without him. I remember we walked outside, and we had pulled up, his car had pulled up, one of the family members had pulled up his car, and I just fell to the ground outside the hospital and just wept. stepping into a completely brand new world.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Everything different than the vision that you saw it to be.
Yeah.
What did it do to your vision of who God was in your life? Because for me, that was shattered too for a little while.
Yeah. You know, what's so interesting about that is, so much of Andrew's, I know this isn't true for everybody, but so much of Andrew's mental health journey was spiritual. There was a big spiritual component to it, and it was very dark and scary for him at times, and he had seeing things and hearing things, and that part was very scary for him. And so when he was wrestling with his mental illness, I felt like I was wrestling with God. Like, where are you, God? Our family's already been through so much. We've already lost his dad. Like, why are you allowing this to happen? Why are you allowing the panic attacks and the anxiety and the depression and the spiritual warfare? Like, why aren't you stopping this? And so it felt like more then that I was like, where are you, God? And then Andrew passed away, and it felt like God was everywhere. So my encounter with God in my grief was like so tangible. It was so wild. Like, every single door that he opened, every single encounter I had with him from the very beginning, that I took a week off to tell my kids. I took a week to grieve and just figure out, like, get my bearings, like, what just happened. And when I did sit them down and tell them, I sat them down on the couch.
And they're so little.
Yeah.
They're so little. I gave them each a fruit snack and told them, Daddy's been sick. He's been going to the doctor. We've been trying to get him help. And, Daddy did something that caused him to die. And after that, the two little ones, we were warned ahead of time, the two little ones would just want to go play. That's how kids process their grief and their pain. So they went outside. They didn't even cry. They just went outside and played. And my oldest walked into the kitchen and just started weeping. And so him and I sat at the table and were coloring in a coloring book that someone had given us about grief together. And the very beginning of the coloring book was talking about the life cycle of caterpillar. And it had like the egg and the caterpillar and the butterfly, and it was comparing it to grief and loss. And after that time, it was time for them to take a nap. So I went over to the curtains to close the curtains. And on the top of the curtains in the living room was a little tiny green caterpillar.
Oh, wow.
And I don't do bugs. I'm not one of the mom that grabs the bugs. Like, kids, look at this. Like, that is so not me. But I grabbed that caterpillar and I went and showed my son Smith, who I was coloring with. And I said, look at this. And he said, it's a miracle from God. So it was so cool to see how God gave us little itty bitty miracles like that to huge miracles, all from the very beginning.
Wow.
So I think, a lot of people, that experience would have turned them away from God. And for me, it really brought me closer. And I felt like God went from where are you to, oh my gosh, you're everywhere.
Yeah. There's so much more to talk about all this. And we really want to connect this to so many of your stories, so many of our friends' stories who are listening right now, who have dealt with grief. Perhaps they've dealt with a loss like this in their own life, to suicide. They're dealing with mental illness issues in their family or themselves. So we want to get into all those things. But right now, let's see what Joyce has to say about grieving and what God's word says about it.
What's the difference in proper, healthy grieving and a spirit of grief? Well, first of all, grieving is deep mental anguish over a loss, or it's deep sorrow. But as I said, I think a very positive way to look at loss is that loss is a place to start over. Endings always bring new beginnings. One door closes, but God is already opening another one. You just have to look for it in faith. Amen? To grieve means to be sorrowful, to mourn, or to be distressed. The grieving process is actually very healthy. If you don't take time to, I think probably the best way for me to say this is to feel the pain. We're not very fond of pain or anything that's uncomfortable. And to be honest, we develop a lot of ways to avoid it. You're going to find out tonight when I talk about this thing about how we run from our problems. Some of the interesting things that we do, one of the biggest ways that we run from things that we should deal with is just in busyness. You can even hide from your problems in church work. I'm too busy working for God to let God deal with me about anything. so I can actually become healthy. Now, you know, my father abused me sexually for a lot of years. I won't go into the details, but it was very bad. And I reached a point where it became obvious to me nobody was going to help me. My mother wasn't going to help me. A few other people that I tried to reach out to didn't want to be involved, didn't want to help me. And I don't know what God's going to have to say to them when they stand before him, but I prayed for their forgiveness and hope and pray that they face reality and they're able to repent. But I got this plan, this I'm going to survive plan. You know, sometimes if you can't find any help, you just dig in and make a decision, I'm going to survive. But what happens sometimes when you do that is there's a hardness that comes on your soul. You almost develop this pretend life where everything's okay, praise the Lord, I don't need you. Who needs you? I don't need anybody. Which is really just not true. And we deal with people like this all the time in the world. That's why people have such a hard time getting along with one another, because there's issues. We go into relationships with all of our baggage, and then we're bumping into each other with our bags that we carry around. Just imagine if I had about 12 suitcases up here this morning, and I asked Dave to come and give me a hug. Well, knock him down with my bags. I came into our relationship with baggage, and it wasn't much fun for him. What can I tell you? I think it's time to pack your bags. I think it's time to unpack your bags. It's time to unpack your guilt. It's time to unpack your anger. It's time to get to the bottom of things in our lives.
There's so much to unpack in a situation like this. How did you begin to unpack what had happened in your life and unpack your grief and allow yourself to sit in it? That's the worst thing.
Yeah. I think the greatest thing I did in my grief was to create space for it to breathe. It needed room to breathe. And so I put all three of my boys in full-time school, and I gave myself the gift of time.
That's good.
And I took time to read. I took time to pray. I took time to go for long walks. I took time to go sit with friends, time to go to therapy. I went to therapy every single week for an hour. I took time to write. Writing was so healing for me, just to write how I was feeling and express how I was feeling. And I'd often sit and write and weep. I even took time that first year to write an entire book. You know, for me, I feel like the greatest disservice I could have done to my grief would be to push it away. And so I just tried to welcome and embrace my pain every way I could. So when those waves came, I let them come. I didn't try to run away from them. I didn't try to hide from them. I would just sit there and let them come. And I remember sitting in my therapist's office and explaining to her how I was feeling, because I was just so sad. I mean, like, just, I have never felt that kind of pain before. I had no idea. If you haven't lost somebody close to you, it's like you have no idea unless you've experienced it, what that pain feels like. I remember sitting with her and looking at her and saying, when do I take medication for this? Because this is like overwhelming. And I don't know that I can make it through another day. I was wrestling with suicidal ideation. I was wrestling with depression. I was like, I don't know how I can wake up and do this again tomorrow. And her response to me, I'll never forget it, was, Kayla, this is how you're supposed to feel. This is how you're supposed to feel. Yeah. And I think it is so often in America, you know, we try to push away that pain. And we try to distract ourselves. We try to busy ourselves. We try to push it to the wayside and act like we're okay when we're not. And so I think the greatest thing I did was just welcome every bit of it along the way and sit in it and write about it and feel it and share it. I think sharing it with friends and family and having those conversations and crying together and letting them hold me and letting them carry the burden of the pain with me. It's not something you can carry on your own. So all those things were so beautiful and helpful and hard and healing.
How did you do that with your kids? Because I'm sure those waves don't just come when they're in bed or at nap time. They're going to come when they're sitting there with you at dinner time or whatever. How did you do that?
I often tried to model for them what healthy grieving looks like. And so if I had a hard day or if I was having a hard moment, I would share with them how I was feeling. Like, I really missed your dad today, or I was crying about this today, or I would let them see me cry. I remember there was one day, it was like back to school shopping, and back to school stuff is stressful as a parent anyway. And it was like the first year of grief, and I was feeling overwhelmed. We were at Walmart, and Walmart was packed with people, and we got home, and I just went and sat in the pantry and wept. Yeah. And my oldest son, Smith, wrote a little note, and the little note said, "God is love," and he brought it to me and sat in the pantry with me. And so I didn't try to hide my pain from my kids. I tried to share my pain with my kids. And then the same for them, when they have those moments, I try to lean in with them. I don't try to create those moments for them. I'm not like poking and prying them and trying to manipulate their emotions and try to get them to feel like I'm feeling, because they're not. They have their own, each have their own little grief journey, and and it is a journey. What they're grieving now is going to look so different when they're only 6, 8, and 9 right now. So when they're teenagers and as they get older and when they're dads one day and get married, it's going to look different. It's like a slow dripping faucet. It's going to slowly drip in over time. And so I just try to lean in and be present when they do want to talk about it, and be available when they do want to talk about it, and honor those special days together too. We still honor his birthday every year. We make a really big deal about his birthday and eat all his favorite junk food and donuts and In-N-Out and all his favorite things, and celebrate him. But, the death day, the death anniversary, I don't make a big deal about that. And I kind of just kind of let that go until maybe they're older and they're ready to embrace what that day is or decide what that day means to them. So I think the greatest gift I've given them is to not pressure them to feel any certain kind of way, and let their grief journey be their grief journey, and my grief journey be my grief journey. And we can all share in each other's journeys together. Yeah.
That's really good. The Bible says that God is near to the brokenhearted, and that's so true. And you were talking about the way that you saw God in really important ways. In my experience, and of course, the loss that I dealt with was very different from yours. It wasn't a spouse, but it was someone very, very close in our family, and so it was gut-wrenching on all of us. But I did the opposite. God was close to me when I was brokenhearted, but I pushed him away. And so I think about grief, and I think about how we all do it so differently. And anything that we can talk about here that will help someone else do it a little bit better than I have at times, or to learn from what we've been through, it's all worth it, because it is such a long, slow, difficult journey. But with the suicide that we faced, we didn't know it was coming. So it was a shock. And so the anger came then, and it was just so much to deal with of, why did you let this happen, when I've told so many stories of people who you rescued, you pulled out of the darkness, and that wasn't what happened here. And so I love talking about the alternative. We don't have to push God away in our anger and our grief. But what I found out was that God was still near to me, even when I was mad at him, and even when, I was trying to keep him at arm's length. And eventually when I just couldn't do it anymore and I just fell apart and broke down and said, God, please, I'm here, do what you can. And he was right there on me, so near.
Yeah.
And so I think about you, Kayla, and I think about all the ups and downs that you must have had and continue to have.
Oh, yeah.
No one grieves in a certain way or a perfect way. Those are just hard walks.
With that, I think the biggest surprising part in grief is the relationship piece, more so of like walking with friends and family, and how you have people that are there at the very beginning and it's really, really loud, at the very beginning, and they're bringing over the casseroles and they're like knocking on your front door and they're like there all the time and are texting you and calling you and checking in, and it's like at a point where you're too overwhelmed to respond. Yeah. And then as time goes on, that tapers off and the loneliness sets in, and their life, they go back to normal and they go back to their lives, but your life's changed forever. And so I think the biggest lesson I've learned is just to be a good friend in grief. And that grief, you have to be a good friend in grief for the long run. That's just it's not just like a 6-month period or a 1-year period. Like it's still happening. Just a few weeks ago was my late husband's birthday, and I had a few of my friends call me earlier in the week and say, "Hi, how are you feeling about Thursday?" Like they remembered that his birthday was coming, and they cared enough to call me and see if I had anything planned, if they could be there for me on that day, how they could support us that day, how could they share in my pain with me that day. So I think that's been the biggest takeaway, and I've learned so much from my friends. I've learned so much from the way that they've loved me and held me and not showed up with an agenda. I think oftentimes we don't know what to say. If we haven't been through pain, we don't know what to say. And so we can drop off the casserole and we can text you and say, let me know if I can do anything for you. But we oftentimes are afraid to show up later on because we don't know what to say. And we feel like we have to have all the right things to say. And the biggest gift that my friends and family have given me in my grief journey has been their presence. It hasn't been something that they've said. It's that they've held me and wept with me and shared in my pain.
So that's really encouraging to me to hear. And it gives me I wouldn't say hope, but it affirms the fact that there are still good people, even in the body of Christ, and I believe that there are, but I just know when you experience different kinds of grief, people don't necessarily, because they don't know what to say, they choose silence. And so I think that that's really, really beautiful that you have had that.
There are so many different types of grief. And so many things that I guess I would call things that crush our spirit, test our faith, and things that we have to learn how to live in a different way. That really is what it comes down to is starting over, finding out what this new life is with God, what he has for us. 'Cause Kayla, you said that you had so much to learn about faith that you didn't realize until you walked through this situation.
Yeah, I think it's that wrestling with God. It's like we see it throughout Scripture. We see even Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane. Like, really, God? You're going to allow this to happen? Like, really? And then ultimately be like, okay, well, I guess this is what we're doing, you know? It's like that wrestling and then ultimately that surrender of like, what else can I do? I can't help but surrender. I can't go back. I can't change time.
Nothing you can do about it.
I can't change the past. I can't change what happened. I wish I could go back and maybe not hand him that baton at 27 years old. There's so many things in hindsight that I wish I could have done differently. But ultimately, you have to surrender and say, okay, God.
That's a big step.
For some reason, you allowed this really awful, horrible thing to be filtered through your hands. So what are we going to do now?
You said you're in that place where it's the what happens now phase of your life. And this is a quote from you that you say, I chose fear over freedom and isolation over community and slowly began to unravel. Can you unpack that for us? Because when we're hurting, it is so easy to go toward isolation versus solitude, which you say is very different.
You know, that isolation period that I wrote about in the book was during my husband's depression. And because he was a public figure in the community and because so many of my close personal friends, he was their pastor. So I didn't feel like I had anybody to talk to. And he was very private and very guarded and didn't really want to talk about how he was feeling and didn't really want to share about how he was feeling. And so I felt the need to protect him too. And so it was really, really hard. And I remember walking around my house and whispering under my breath, "This is the summer from hell." And I didn't feel like I had anybody I could talk to. I had like his family, and that was about it. And I would just shake my head when they come over and be like, "This is really hard," you know?
I don't know. I just hope people take, hear the severity of that and don't take it lightly, because even though we're like, that's not what God wants for us. And that's what I'm learning during my time of grief. So I'm having a time of grief, not because of someone that died. Yeah. Now, I mean, I've experienced death in my family before that was really hard, but I'm experiencing grief of the death of my marriage. Yeah. and the same thing that you were saying that happened to you the day that your husband died. It's a lot. If what you said is exactly how I felt when it's like, it killed my dream. It killed everything. Yeah. It's gone. And I literally, once those divorce papers were, it's like, what do I do? Yeah. And what, so I'm experiencing grief in an extremely different way. But I don't know. It's just,
but there are still things that are hard in life, no matter how good of a Christian we are, no matter how much we love the Lord. There are still things that are very hard that he walks through with us. So I want to go back to what Joyce has to share one more time about godly mourning. And then we want to offer you some hope here at the end, because that really is the key. God doesn't leave us where we are at that lowest point. So let's check in with Joyce and come back.
And the Israelites wept for Moses in the plains of Moab 30 days. Then the days of weeping and mourning for Moses were ended. Now, this is an interesting thing in the Word of God, because under the law, and we don't live under the law, so nobody's giving you 30 days to mourn and get over your problems, but there's a good message here that God gave people 30 days to mourn. You can be as sad as you want to these 30 days, but when they were over, then God expected them to go on. In one of the books that I've written, I've got a story that I can't remember all the details about accurately, so I hope I don't tear it up too bad, but there's about a tribe that lived out in the middle of a jungle somewhere, and somebody actually went over there and became a missionary with them. And one of the things that they discovered, which was quite astounding, was these people, although they had lots of things that they could have been very upset over. They'd been robbed by another local tribe and they'd taken all their stuff. They were a very joyful people, and they had no bitterness, no resentment, but they had this certain thing that they did in their culture where when they had a loss or when a loved one died or the time when their village was robbed, they had this little house tent-like thing. And so if something really bad happened to me, then I would go in that place and they would sing out their pain. They turned it into a song. I'm hurting so bad, I just don't think I can stand it. How much longer can I cry? I don't think I can endure this one more day. I'm so angry that I feel like I just want to knock somebody's head off. This is a true story. And they would stay in there and do that, venting, letting their pain out, feeling their pain, and then giving it away until they felt like they had a total release. Then they'd come out and go back to living. Don't stuff your stuff.
I do love that story that Joyce shares about different cultures that have ways of dealing with grief better than we do.
Yeah.
There are many ways that different cultures deal with grief that's just, it's overt. You're allowed to grieve loudly and to give into it, and then to move afterwards, to move forward. And Kayla, you said something that you said you've learned that you don't move on, you move forward. What do you mean by that?
The pain that you felt that very first day when that really hard, horrible thing happened, you carry that pain with you for the rest of your life. I truly believe that I can tap into that pain any moment, a smell, a sight, a sound, a picture, like anything can bring me back to that pain. So I will carry that pain. My boys will carry that pain with them for the rest of their lives. And that's something that I didn't understand until I lost my husband. I thought it was something that you just got over. this really hard thing happened. Time went on. Time heals all wounds. You know, like all those lies we believe, and like, oh, you just get over it and you move on, and it's all pretty and all great again. But it's not true. No. I mean, pain moves forward with us, and we build a beautiful life around that pain. And you know, I think pain is an invitation to transformation, and if you allow it, pain can be one of the greatest teachers of your life. Yeah. It really can be. I mean, pain has been one of the greatest teachers of my life, and it's given me so much compassion and empathy for other people that are walking through pain that's completely different than mine. Yeah. Pain is pain is pain is pain is pain. So it's like you have this seat that you didn't have before, where you can sit with somebody and hold them and like truly see them in ways that you couldn't before. So yeah, I think it is. We're all handed our own prescription of pain throughout our life. We're each handed our own prescription of pain, and it can be a beautiful gift if we allow it to be. You know, I think anytime we go through something difficult, and especially if it's a really great pain, I think the biggest step towards hope is realizing that joy and sorrow can coexist. I didn't understand that fully before. And I'll never forget we had this Mother's Day makeover. It was the very first Mother's Day after my husband had passed away. And my oldest son's kindergarten classroom. And they had one of those like fill in the blanks for Mother's Day. Like, my mom's favorite food is this. It's like salad, you know. My mom loves to sleep. Like all these like the cute little things of the fill in the blanks. And one of them said, I love it when my mom takes me to blank and blank, and my son had put the cemetery and Disneyland. Literally the saddest place on earth and the happiest place on earth in the same sentence. And that's grief. I mean, it was such a picture of what healthy grieving looks like. It is one foot in the saddest place on the planet and the other foot in the happiest place. And that's how you move forward. It's both. It's allowing yourself to feel the pain, embracing the pain, welcoming the pain, and it's also allowing yourself to feel the joy and laugh, you know, and enjoy life again. And I think it takes time to get back to the joy, and it's a choice every single day to look for the joy and seek out the joy and believe that there's still joy and that life can be beautiful again. But moving forward, it's like, man, you got to have both.
That's really good. I found... For me, something that has been really important is to let down what I think is my own strength. Yeah. Because I build up this reason why I shouldn't fall apart, or this person who I need to be for somebody else, or who I think I am, and God allows me to fall all over the place. Yeah. He allows me to lay on the floor and cry. And I didn't know that for a long time. I mean, you almost feel like that's just showing all your weakness and giving in to the grief. Sometimes you've got to give in to the grief and just, like we were saying, feel it. And doesn't mean you stop there because you're there for a minute. You move on, but not feeling like my strength was what was going to overcome the grief. I think I had that misconception that strength would do that and that God was in my strength. And that makes no sense at all when you think about it. And so what I began to do is to look for something that I could enjoy, exactly what you're talking about. Even when you feel so miserable, if I could see a beautiful flower outside, or just a smile on a kid, or something that would bring a little bit of joy again, like you were saying, and seeing those things intertwine and coexist, because you do begin seeing glimpses of, well, maybe I'm going to be okay. You're talking about rebuilding beautiful. That's one of the phrases that you love to talk about. Do you have that hope that you'll rebuild something even more beautiful in your life than you had before?
Yeah, and it's a completely different version of beautiful. It's not going to be the same beautiful that it was before. It can't be. And so it's this rebuilding a completely different version of beautiful, and this really deep guttural belief that beauty is still possible. And I'm seeing that. I'm seeing that in my boys, and they're thriving, and they're happy, and they're filled with joy, and they're doing so well. And I see that in myself too. You know, as time has gone on, it's almost been 4 years now, like the grief is lighter. The grief is different. It's like I'm not clinging to or reaching for this life I used to have, and I'm more, the dust has settled, and I'm more settled into what is, and what this life is, and what this life looks like. And choosing to be like, okay, well, this is what it is, and how can we make this beautiful? How can we make this good? And choosing adventure, and choosing fun, and choosing to get outside and go make new memories with my kids has been so powerful.
Yeah. We have a couple resources that are absolutely free to share with you if it would be helpful. If you go to joycemeyer.org/talkitout, we have a free booklet called Overcoming Grief, and it's just really great scripturally based help for you with whatever that you're dealing with right now. And then also, if you've had, or someone that you know and love is dealing with this issue of suicide, if you've had thoughts that you just know you need to deal with before something terrible happens, we want you to know there is not shame in that. Reach out, do something. We have a Bible study for you that is a great place to start. You can also get that at joycemeyer.org/talkitout. It's a wonderful Bible study for hope for any of you who are dealing with that. There is, of course, the National Suicide Hotline. I don't care who you call, but do what you need to do. I know it's hard sometimes to realize that it's okay to reach out for help, and it's okay to be around people even when you're feeling like you don't have anything to offer anyone else. So another great thing that you can do is to come to our women's conference. There is nothing like hearing 20,000 plus women worshiping together, and worshiping out of a sacrificial heart sometime of grief, and women who are in this place together, coming from all different places and going through so many different things in their life. When you look over a sea of women like that,
it's incredible.
Powerful.
it's amazing. And you look out there and you see, yes, I know there are so many hurts and so many different women who are dealing with different things in their life. But here, we're all here for one thing, and that's to be together and to celebrate God and for Him to touch our lives.
Yes.
And it makes a huge impact. So our 40th anniversary Love Life Women's Conference is amazing. And it is coming up in September, the 22nd through the 24th. So here's the deal for you. If you would like to register to win 2 free tickets to the conference, you can do it right now.